Hey, the number 70 in the Bible is it's pretty amazing. So I actually did a series on 12. Perhaps you're familiar with it, but part of that series was I talked about 12 in religion and kind of the significance of it. But 70 in the Bible is actually pretty connected to the number 12. So maybe we can start off with that, and then I'd like to get into this kind of the meat of this is with the Daniel 9:25 scripture. But let's just start off with the relation to number 12. So perhaps you recall back to that video, but there's 12 is kind of linked in the Old Testament and the New Testament, primarily based on there's 12 tribes, which kind of forms the structure of the tribes of Israel in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, there's 12 disciples, which also sort of forms the basis of the early start of Christianity. So it turns out the 70 is related to that, and that it's kind of easy to miss this, but in Genesis 46, it talks about, and also in the first chapter of Exodus, it talks about, there's 12 sons of Jacob that went into Egypt, but it also says there were 70 total if you include all of the grandchildren and everything. So there's actually, in that sense, 70 is sort of like this expansion from the 12. It's like there's 12 sons, but then they had offspring, and then there's 70 that are all going into Egypt. And you actually see a similar thing in Luke chapter 10 in the New Testament, because of course Jesus has his 12 disciples, but what's easy to miss is he also had 70 followers. And in Luke 10, he takes these 70 followers and he sends them out to do basically what his disciples were doing. So it's sort of like there's this inner ring of say Jacob was really close to Joseph. He loved Joseph, and then even with Jesus, he's got this inner ring where John is the disciple who he loves, and then maybe you could throw Peter and James in there too as this inner circle. And they got this circle of 12, which is the tribes or the disciples. And then, but outside of that, in both cases, there's this circle, this wider circle of 70. And I should mention there's some different transcripts for the New Testament call it 72, but 70 works a little bit better, at least for this. So I'll stick with 70 for here. But there's also some interesting, or maybe they seem like kind of odd connections with 12 and 70. Like in Exodus 15 and Numbers 33, it talks about they went to this place. It just randomly says, we went to this place and there was 12 springs of water and there were 70 palm trees. And it was why would they say that? Well, apparently to them, that number 12 and 70, they kind of go together, and that was some kind of significance with the fact that, they saw these at this place they went. And this is while they're wandering in the desert. And you see it in some other places too, like the number 70, it came with Jacob's whole family. His big extended family was 70 when they went to Egypt. But you see it come up a couple times with different people in the Old Testament having 70 sons. Gideon, 70 sons. Jerubbaal, Ahab all had 70 sons. And there's talks in different places throughout history of the Hebrew Scriptures that talk about there being appointed 70 elders. So you see it in other places. So you see 70 pop up sort of in connection to how 12 is used multiple times, but you may be wondering 12, it kind of links back I discussed earlier in the video, there's 12 lunar cycles and 12 months, and that's pretty clear where that links back to. But what about 70? Well, there's it's kind of interesting that it pops up a couple times in Psalm 90 and Isaiah 23. It talks about 70 years as the number of years of a person lives, or the number of years of a king. The funny thing about that being in the Bible is actually if you go look this up right now, look at what the average life expectancy is in the world, and the latest I saw was 70.8. So it's funny that was it was written 70 years is how long someone lives, and that's still the average lifespan of a human being in or maybe that might be specifically males in the world right now still. All right, but probably the most amazing place where this number 70 shows up in the Bible is within the context of Daniel chapter 9. But before jumping right into that, you kind of need a little bit of a background on 70 and with the significance of it. And to do that, you go back 100 years back to the prophet Jeremiah, and he writes in chapter 25 in the book of Jeremiah how this is while the Jews are still in Jerusalem. They're still doing fine, but he writes about how they're going to be taken away and go into captivity for 70 years. And this is just to give you maybe a little bit of a feel for what this is like. I don't know if you've ever seen The Lord of the Rings, and you remember when Frodo he grabs this ball and he's got these visions, and these is like the most horrific thing he can imagine. It's like the Shire, and it's all on fire, and everything is destroyed, and all of the hobbits are being taken away by these orcs, and they're in chains, and they're being dragged away somewhere. And that's basically what Jeremiah is saying. He's like saying, this is what he sees. This is what's going to happen. Jerusalem's going to be absolutely decimated, destroyed. The temple is going to be destroyed, and everything's going to be on fire. And you're going to be carried. The enemy's going to come and going to carry you away captive to a different land as slaves. So pretty brutal prediction here. But then, and you go back to the reason of why is he making this prediction? Well, he says it's because they weren't following God's word, and he gives several examples for it. But this is actually a little bit elucidated in 2 Chronicles 36. Is that it's saying they had to go into captivity for 70 years to repay back 70 Sabbaths, and it's like, what does that even mean? 70 Sabbath years? I thought the Sabbath was like a day, like you rest on the seventh day. But it turns out there's a little bit more to the Sabbath than that. In Exodus 23. It talks about every 6 years, in that seventh year, they're supposed to let the land go fallow, so that the poor could eat it, or beasts could eat it. And apparently they weren't doing that, because 2 Chronicles 36 indicates that they hadn't been following this law to let their land go fallow every seventh year, and this 70 years was punishment. So it's like they'd missed 70 Sabbath years, and so if you calculate that out, it's like for 490 years they weren't following this, because it's every 70 years times 7 would be 490 years they were disobeying and not letting their land go foul in the seventh year. So all those Sabbaths that they didn't do, well, they're going to pay those back as captives in Babylon. And that's where Daniel 9 picks up, because he's like, he goes out, he's fasting and he's praying, and he's like, look, I look back and read Jeremiah, I know we're supposed to be here 70 years. What's going to happen next? What are you going to do? Like, when are you going to send us back? When are we going to be restored? And he records that the angel Gabriel comes to him, and he kind of just sticks with this theme of 70. So it's like, yeah, you're here for 70 years, but here's the good news. In 70 weeks, Messiah the Prince will come. And there's actually a little bit more detailed than that. So let me just go ahead and read Daniel 9:25. It says, from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And after the 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off. So he's actually talking about this period of 69 weeks until Messiah, and then he talks about this other 70th week after that, which we're not going to get into. But it's kind of interesting, because when he says these 69 weeks, he's actually... That word, if you look it up in Hebrew, it's Shabuah. I think I say that right, but it could be 7 days, more commonly 7 days, but also can be 7 years. So it's like 7 periods of time. So in this case, it appears he's talking about 77s, where each of those weeks is a week of 7 years. But this is really interesting, because if you go back, like, this all started because there was like 490 years where they weren't obeying the Sabbath, and they had to pay that back with 70 years. And then he's saying, okay, well, now there's going to be this other 490 years. Like, that's how it started for them to go into captivity. And then the angel Gabriel saying, well, this is sort of a promise that I'm going to give you, and it's relating back to that 70 times 7, or 490 years. But in order to really understand this, it's actually kind of a difficult one to know, like, when does it start? What's this time period and everything? So if we just go back and start, like, well, when does this period start? It says from the command to restore and build Jerusalem. So if we go look at Nehemiah 2, you can see that Nehemiah is talking to King Artaxerxes, and it starts off saying it was in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, and Artaxerxes says, Nehemiah asks if they can go back and rebuild Jerusalem, and the king says yes. And not only does he say yes, but he said, here's some letters, take these to all the governors, all the people of the land are going to help you do this. So this is like this official command to specifically build Jerusalem, and it's in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. And the start of King Artaxerxes' reign is debatable. Oftentimes it's said it's 465 or 464. But if we just go with 464 as the start of his reign, and you say, well, the 20th year of it, that would be 444 BC. So that's a pretty it's it's not necessarily exact because it's hard to tell some exact time when you're going back that far in the record, but that's a pretty good starting point of 444. Okay, so then we have this is the harder part. It's like, well, what's this 69 weeks mean? Well, if you take 69 times 7, that's going to give you 483, and if we want to can count those 7 as years, that means 483 years. But here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because if we go by like Nehemiah's understanding at that time, or even Daniel's understanding at that time in Babylon, the Persians, which Nehemiah was under, or the Babylonians, which Daniel was under, or the Jews themselves, they all had a 360-day calendar. So if we interpret that as 483, you could call it prophetic years, or Babylonian years, or Persian years, or Hebrew years. That was the calendar they were using. So if we take that 483 years, and then we multiply it by 360 days per Hebrew year, and then divide it by 365 days per solar year, we end up, those Babylonian years cancel out. So that's 476 years. So if we start at 444, we got to go 476 years from that. So if we start at 444 and we go 443 years from that, we get to 1 BC. And this is a little bit tricky because there's not like a normal timeline where there's actually like a 0 BC or 0 AD. The timeline just goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. So if we just add 1 year from that 1 BC, we get up to 1 AD. So that would be 444 years. And then if you go another 32 years from that, you get that full 476 years, and that takes you out to 33 AD. And if you go back to Nehemiah, this chapter, he says it's in the month of Nisan, which is the first month after the vernal equinox. So it's like April, or maybe March sometimes. And if you go up exactly 476 years from there, you get to about April 33 AD. And you may be curious as to what's happening in April 33 AD. And everything seems to indicate that that's actually like the specific month that Jesus was crucified. And why that's likely, 33 AD is very likely that month, is because that was when the 4 different accounts in the gospel talk about him being crucified on Passover, and there's only so many years in that time period where Passover actually fell on a Friday, and 33 AD is one of those. And there's a couple other reasons with the different timelines that Luke gives in the Bible, like for example when John the Baptist started his ministry, that indicate that 33 AD is the most likely year where this happened. And then if you go back to this to Daniel 9:26, it says, and after the 62 weeks, which was after the 7 weeks before that, Messiah shall be cut off. So we see fast forward 476 years, and Jesus is being crucified, he's being cut off from the land of the living. So this to me is just blew my mind. I learned about this like 20 years ago, and I remember just being like oh my goodness, this is insane. Like, because this is this book of Daniel was written hundreds of years BC, and then you look at this timeline and it just at least for me it's like it just really blows my mind. But you may be asking even why I'm talking about this though, because I'm usually do math or science or engineering videos, but it turns out that one of the first people to really dig into this was Isaac Newton. I mean, he actually wrote a book on observations on the prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of John. So he actually was really into this. Actually, he wrote a lot more about religion than he did about math or science anyway. So I guess from his example, I guess it's okay not to be interested in more other things just besides math and science. But in this case, this really kind of ties in a lot of math, with the number 70 and all these predictions, and it also ties in some history with all the calendars and with these texts, and of course with religion. So it's kind of combining a bunch of different topics. But perhaps like Isaac Newton, you're interested in that kind of stuff too. I mean, to me, it's just incredible. But there's probably a pretty good likelihood that maybe you've heard of this before, and you've heard different interpretations of it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to interpret this, between what the start time is, how long are these years, and when is Jesus crucified, and all this stuff. So if you got a better one, debate me, because I'm pretty sure I'm right. But I'll be happy to to see if maybe there's a better way to understand this. So let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you're doing great, and until next time, take care.
But as a sort of addendum here, let's go back to the mathematical or scientific basis for the significance of 70. So it actually relates back to the ancient year of 12 months of 30 days each for 360 days that we've been discussing. So going by the system, the months are going to be offset from the season by about 5.24 days per year if you compare the 360-day year to the 365.24 day solar year. So after 70 ancient years, the cycle is going to be off by the 70 years times the 5.24 offset each ancient year, and that's going to equal 366.8 days if you just add all those offsets up, and that's going to be about one solar year. So another way to think of this is 70 ancient years is going to equate to 25,200 days, while 69 solar years equates to 25,201.6 days. So 70 ancient years is the same as 69 solar years. So either way you want to look at this, the system of the ancient year of 360 days is basically going to cycle back to its initial correspondence with the seasons after 7 years. So perhaps this is the mathematical or physical root of the significance of 70 as it relates to this 360-day ancient year we've been discussing.